welcome to a podcast about Dragon Ball, which takes place in a very iconic location. Yet, for some people, they have to crane their necks up on the lookout. For those of you who don't know, Up on the Lookout is a podcast with a difference. We do talk about the world of Toriyama and his Dragon Balls and teaching dinosaurs to ride balls and whatnot, because I have a bird that's known as Toriyama, and the things that he can do, wow, just beyond belief. But what else is beyond belief is today's guest, but let us introduce our usual stalwart, our sidekick Haverock.
Hello, I'm in the walls.
Yes, and we are the eyes on the wall and the walls itself up here. But also joining us is a guest for the first time in quite a while, actually. Hav and I have just been quite used to just talking amongst ourselves, really, but today's guest is very special. He's coming off the back of the Dragon Ball Super manga, and even though you may not think it, you pretty much see their handicraft every single month for the past year and a half. It's none other than the letterer of the Dragon Ball Super manga, Brandon Bovia.
How's it going, folks?
Yes, thank you very much for joining us, Brandon.
Thank you.
Yesterday, I was looking at the comments of our Super manga review, and then I saw your comment, and then I thought, well, hang on a minute, that username looks very familiar.
Basically, what Mas is trying to say, we are the appreciators of good pew 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 pew. You know.
And let's get this question out of the way before we get into actually talking about your career instead of just the gimmick. Was that in reference to Trunks and Krillin?
It wasn't, but I thought of it as I was working. I was like, it kind of reminds me of the joke from Abridged, which is something I think of quite often. Actually, I'm a huge fan of Dragon Ball Z Abridged and Team 4 Star's work in general. And obviously, I have been for much longer than I've been working on Dragon Ball, so it's sort of been like I don't know, it's a cool thing. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I mean, one of these days it'd be funny just like somewhere in the text you might just see the word dodge just a little bit in bold, just a little bit bolder than the other words. So that means whenever someone is just going dodge,
I would. Yeah. Trust me, if I could get away with it, I would. I probably can't. But.
Oh no. We wouldn't. Yeah. It's a pipe dream.
Yeah,
but it's
for sure.
Still you have the power in theory. But no, we'd like you to keep your job because you're doing great.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so Brandon, do tell us about yourself and also the social medias where people can find you, because your job may be a little bit under the radar, but just bring us up to speed and by in turn the viewers and listeners.
So I'm Brandon Bovia. I'm a manga letterer, which basically means that I handle all of the text design for the manga that I work on. So I'm like copying and pasting the translation into the art. I'm sort of formatting the text to make sure that it looks readable. Depending on the project, I may pick fonts, or sometimes I have to use whatever, like the how do I put it, the range of choice I have on fonts and stuff varies wildly from project to project. But things like sound effects as well, whether or not they're subtitled or replaced, or what kind of styling the subtitles take and all that stuff is all sort of a mix of like creativity plus publisher style guides. So when you're reading manga, you're reading the text in a way that is specifically designed usually to be like as readable as possible within the limitations of localizing from a completely different language.
Yeah, of course. So I imagine with those types of things, because with manga, sound effects are very much important, because in manga and anime there are lots of characters, because sometimes you hear the actors in the Japanese dub, they kind of go shi 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 shi. They vocalize the sound effects. So people may think it's not a very it's not something that requires much thought, but it really does.
It's a lot of thought, actually. I don't know if we'll get into this later, but in particular with the the English volumes of Super, which the print stuff at Viz Media usually has like we completely redo these sound effects in English, and so with such a series with such a focus on martial arts, that usually means like lots of action, lots of just tons of sound effects from page to page, and it's like you have to make sure that it's not only readable and visually pleasing, but also like respects the artwork, matches the Japanese, and there's just like 1.5 billion things to keep track of at any one time.
And chapter 73 was especially what I can see.
Oh yeah,
not a lot of dialogue, but a lot of like sound effects, right?
Okay, let's move on to let's talk a bit more about you, because it's all very well and good talk about Dragon Ball Super on a Dragon Ball podcast. You graduated from North Carolina State with a Bachelor of Arts. I myself also graduated with a Bachelor of Arts, so you know, I did all that, but at the same time, it's like I had no idea what I was going to end up doing.
Oh yeah.
So could you really imagine yourself that you managed to get to work not only in the professional circuit of manga, but also on Dragon Ball?
Dude, this was a top 5. I call it a top 5 dream job. I actually went to college to study animation, and I wanted to move to Japan and become an animator on anime. And that was what I was working towards for the latter half of my college career. And then I just sort of like after I ended up not finishing, but for a while after I dropped out of college, I was like, well, what do I do? And then I ended up like one manga publisher in particular, Seven Seas Entertainment. They had a cold call like in 2016 or so, just for like, hey, I'm a manga letterist, and I'm like, I know how to use Photoshop. Sure. And then I got my first gig in like March of 2017. And then it has just been sort of like a slow burn from a freelance thing I did just in my infinite free time to becoming more or less my full-time job.
Well, that's great. Nah, that's really, really good. And I know all about the grind of trying to like find all the different, gigs in the freelance market.
Yeah,
it's very, very tough. Yeah, because it's all about just trying to have the hustle, and you get lots of rejections or polite declines.
Yeah,
sometimes,
pretty
but
much.
Usually it's like, proper rejections. But it's all part of growing up, really.
Yeah.
But ultimately, how did you get the job with the manga? Because I noticed from your A&N credits that you got it from chapter 53.
Yes.
So you were right in at the point where we first saw 7-3.
Mm-hmm.
So how'd you score that gig?
It was a mix of I was already working with the editor of Super at that point on other projects, and they I guess for context, it is usually depending on the publisher, like the editor is sort of like the in-house project manager. And it is the editor who chooses what freelancers that they want to work with. Because I had already built up a working relationship with the person who edits Dragon Ball Super, and the previous letterer, I guess, we all have like contract things and time constraints, and maybe I don't know the particular details of like how the previous person left, but there was just an open slot, and they were like, hey, do you want it? And I'm like, yeah.
Well, of course. So tell me, so how does the process work? Like within the time frames? Because we know that Dragon Ball Super, it's on a monthly basis, and it's a little bit slower than it would have been back in the days of Toriyama when it was on a weekly basis. And that was really, we know that Toriyama did everything at the last minute. So I imagine those poor letterers and stuff like that back in the day, they must have been like going like, why are you making this harder for us? But yeah, realistically, so when does the process start, and what is part of it?
When it's basically just like we have this whole system now of people way over my head coordinating with the Japanese publishers to make sure that they get us all the materials we need. So that's like the completed Japanese chapter and like all of the high resolution files and stuff. And it's pretty much just like how to put it. There's a I don't know how much information I'm allowed to divulge as far as like timing and stuff is concerned. I would say it's a reasonable amount of time before the Japanese release, because over in Japan they need to have that stuff done so that the magazine can get printed and distributed and stuff like that. So
of course
that stuff is done, like a couple weeks ahead of time, or at least that's when we receive it. And so we usually. It is usually sort of like do your best to get it done like in around 24 to 48 hours. Chapter of Super usually only takes me like 4 hours, but I also have to schedule it around all my other stuff. Just sort of hit the ground running once the materials are in.
I imagine like the day or two prior, you'd be thinking, okay, a super chapter's coming up. And suddenly you get the call.
There's never an exact timing to Super's chapters in particular. It's sort of like in a range, and sometimes it ends up being convenient. Sometimes it's like, oh, this dropped right in the middle of all my other projects. Like even chapter 73, I was working on while doing my 2 other simulpubs at the same time, which were Kaiju number 8 and Hardboiled Cop and Dolphin. So I had to do all 3 of those chapters basically in a weekend, which was really fun.
Oh, wow. Oh, gosh.
Back to back.
Blimey. No, real trooper right there. No, that's fantastic. So you got it from chapter 53. Has this been a good experience for you?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I've always been a fan of Dragon Ball. I'm from the Toonami generation, so it's impossible not to be a fan of Dragon Ball. But I was never really keeping up with Super other than just like through osmosis through my friends. While the anime was running, and then I have friends who read the manga and who were just sort of like giving me bits and pieces. I wasn't really keeping an eye on it, and then once, I mean, it was really funny. Once I started at chapter 53, I was like, oh, okay, so Piccolo's fighting a guy. Like, all right, we're cool. Like, I read the previous chapter, but just sort of being thrown like, oh, you're in the Mora arc, and I'm like, what's going on?
Why is this guy a goat?
Yeah, this guy a goat. It was, I knew enough about Dragon Ball to just be like, okay, I get what's going on. Like there's a bad guy and Piccolo's fighting, and is at the same time as I started working on the monthly chapters, like I started working on the monthly chapters and the volumes at the same time. But because of publishing timelines and stuff like that, ended up, releasing way later the volumes. But I started on volume 9, which was like, it's like the last 2 chapters of the Tournament of Power and the first 2 of the Moro arc. And when I started working on the volumes, that is primarily just like the sound effects. Because we can just like reuse the lettering from the monthly chapters, and we just like, it's basically just like copying, pasting them, and like reformatting them, finding and fixing mistakes and stuff like that. But I was still using the previous letterer's work on the dialogue while making my own sound effects on volume 9. So it was sort of like halfway through the Mora arc while also working at the beginning at the same time.
Yeah.
A little bit later on, I ended up reading the entirety of the Super manga, like the whole way through, just on my own time. I was like using the manga to get back into Dragon Ball, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, that's going to be one of my questions actually. Like, what do you think of the actual manga? Because you said that, you had been out of touch with Super somewhat, but now that you've had a chance to catch up with it, now not just for your own personal sake, but also for work, what do you think of it?
I really did enjoy the Moro arc. I keep touch with a lot of, like fan reactions and stuff. So I'm sort of always really curious, like what are the people who are really into the stuff thinking about it? And, it's really funny that it's like a sort of mixed, there's some people who are really hot on it, some who aren't. I really enjoyed it. It felt like a very sort of familiar, but not in a bad way, not always in a bad way. Maybe occasionally a bit just like, okay, we've seen some of this stuff before, but I think it's a very well put together Dragon Ball story arc. I feel like the just sort of it hits all the right notes for me in a way that I really enjoyed. And then reading back onto some of the prior stuff was, I was also just it was a good casual read, I guess. Is maybe a good way to put it.
Consensus amongst the fan base is that while, a lot of the people got annoyed about the manga during chapter to chapter, when you read it as a whole, a lot of people start to appreciate it more. Like as a complete story, as a complete package.
I think that's the best way to go about it, because there are things that you end up chewing on a month-to-month basis that end up you just sort of move on to the next thing when you're reading it all as a whole. And so it is definitely that's something I try to keep in mind when it comes to like serialized comics like that, where it's like, I mean, it's hard not to just like chew on every single little detail in the story, because you have to wait a whole month to get to the next piece. But I always try to the best of my ability to like, okay, how is this going to play into the big picture, and think about, where is the story going, and like, are the things that we're arguing about really going to matter when this whole thing is over?
It's kind of our YouTube thing. When chapter drops, we need to do some discussion videos that will relate to this topic, right? To the last chapter before the next one drops, because it can no longer be actual, because we make a lot of assumptions.
Yeah, you can take something and then it'll be completely irrelevant in in a month. And I see this happening on Fast Forward. I obviously, as somebody who works on the other side, I don't really appreciate people posting like out of context screenshots from leaked magazines, and then I see a bunch of tweets of people like, why are they doing this and this? And then when the official release happens like 2 days later, it's like, oh, like, you guys go through this every month, just wait. Just wait for the full context.
I know, but people are so starved for the anime. It's like people are like really going like, oh,
they're hungry.
No, we want more.
It's awesome in that sense, that it's just like seeing the passion and the hunger for more content is just I really appreciate that, like that energy in the, at least the sort of little bits and pieces I see of the Dragon Ball fan base. And I'm just like, I love how everybody shows up month to month.
Oh, yes, of course. Hav and I, we're not big fans of spoilers, but we do have to absorb them, take them for the team, because it's all part of our analysis and stuff like that. But what would you say has been like the biggest, like, the reaction that you've seen on Twitter? And it's something that you knew as you were working on it, and then you just kind of like the big contrast between what you saw and spoilers and what actually turned out to be real.
I'm trying to think. I think it might have been the chapter when Vegeta used Force Spirit Fission on Moro. People were like, Vegeta, let's go. And then I was just like, because usually by the time people start seeing that stuff, I'm already done. So I've already seen the full thing. So I'm just sort of watching, just eating popcorn, just like, you folks have no idea. Or I think a lot of, even when the chapter came out, a lot of folks were pretty upset at like Goku giving Moro a Senzubin. Some of the latter bits of that encounter just sort of like dripped out piece by piece. And I was just like, well, yeah, people are taking this and running with it, but in the full context, it doesn't mean what you think it means. And so it is another way, in a maybe short-term sense, that leaks can be really harmful. A lot of times folks just get the wrong idea about stuff. I mean, we even saw it, the most recent chapter talking about like how Granola was able to handle like Ultra Instinct Goku. And I saw a few comments about just like, being kind of disappointed by that. And I'm like, well, yeah, see it before you jump to that conclusion.
The clue is in the eye. It's the eyes. The eyes.
The eyes.
Beware the eyes of Granola. That's the thing. It's very true. And I do feel your pain. I do get that feeling that you have to put up with.
It's legitimately frustrating in that sense that like, well, this shouldn't be happening in the first place. And I wish we could do more to make sure that it doesn't happen. I feel a little bummed because I'm just like, y'all, the fans are sort of like ruining that first experience for themselves, because you're going into the next chapter, the next part of the story with like preconceived notions. Or like you might go like, I'm expecting to hate this off of, like a blurry phone camera I saw on Twitter or whatever. Yeah. It's a whole messy thing. And obviously, as somebody who works on the other side, I have a bias, and I wish people wouldn't look at that stuff and distribute that stuff.
No, okay. Well, let's bring it up to lighten up a bit, because no, because of like what's been the most memorable moment, like the bit where you're in the manga where you have to add your craft to it, and it's like Oh, that's good.
I think this more pertains to the volumes in particular, because I think those are where I really have to like stretch my muscles and handle the sound effects and stuff. The volume that I've finished most recently ended with Goku achieving Mastered Ultra Instinct and just giving a beat down on Moro. And even while I was working on like the monthly version of that chapter, I was like, when it comes time to the volumes, like people are gonna want to see just like the sound effects just have to look cool. They should be evocative of the huge momentous moment that this is. And that's something that while I was waiting to get to start working on the volume version of that chapter, in the back of my mind, I was like, this is like, this is the moment of the story arc. And I want to make sure that, my work on it is, gives it the proper weight and respect that it deserves.
Yeah, no, it's always really good to hear it from that point of view, because it is a very momentous occasion. And from as far as we can tell, you certainly nailed it.
I don't think the volume version of that one is out yet. Yeah, when folks see the English sound effects for that one, I think people will be really even on a subconscious level, they'll be pleased. They might just as long as they think, wow, this thing looks cool, or they think, wow, I don't want anyone to be distracted by the English sound effects or something like that. I want the reader to be able to read the comic, and obviously, if there are folks who are aware of lettering for manga and the challenges that entails, that's awesome. My job first and foremost is to make sure that the text blends in with the art. The reader is there to enjoy the story and the artwork, and I'm there to just sort of get out of the way.
The purpose of this podcast is to make people more aware of the huge role that you have. Your job is something that a lot of people don't think often about, don't even realize. I think that raising the awareness of what you do is pretty interesting and cool.
It's something I'm aware of, and it's a line that I'm always trying to straddle between I spend hours, dozens and dozens of hours on this stuff, and I want to make sure that people are aware of just sort of the effort and the craft that goes into it. But I also want to make sure that 99% of folks are just there to read a good comic. If somebody wants to go out and find that insight, it's there. But I don't want, it's all about the manga at the end of the day. It's not about me. And so particularly with my social media presence, I'm always trying to balance that. I am simply one piece of the puzzle. I'm not it's not all about me, but I want to make sure that if somebody finds this interesting, or if there's something that I think is interesting, then, I want to share it, because I like it and I have a lot of fun doing it. And with Dragon Ball in particular, I've been trying to make a habit of posting snippets of the volumes that are just I think the sound effect I worked on is really cool. So I'll usually grab about 10 or 15 panels whenever a new volume comes out and just here, this is cool.
Okay, well, no, that's great. But speaking of things that you do, you don't just do the lettering, but for some manga that you work on, you actually do some touch-up art. Like for the thing, Who Says Warriors Can't Be Babes, which already by that title, I am intrigued. So when you do the touch-up art bit, what do you mean by that? Yeah, what does that entail?
You have Japanese text that, be it a sound effect or a sign or something, or some dialogue that's hand drawn into the artwork, and needs to be readable in English. So that usually involves erasing the Japanese, arranging the English text into the art, so that it looks natural, and then sort of redrawing parts of the art so that the English text now looks seamless. In the context of Dragon Ball, because Dragon Ball is one of my most just difficult, time-consuming touch-up projects, because all of the fights is just all speed lines. It's just speed lines everywhere. So when I'm erasing the Japanese sound effects, putting in the English ones, there are obviously bits of the art where the Japanese used to be that the English doesn't cover. So I have to go in and just sort of redraw all those tiny little lines and stuff. That
kind of stuff just sounds tedious. And yeah, somebody has to do it.
It's very, very tedious. Yeah, basically, yeah. In the context of Who Says Warriors Can't Be Babes, which is a fun little 3-volume project that's just sort of it's a little bit of a Dragon Quest parody, with a little bit of a lot of bit of sort of pervy rom-com antics thrown into it. But there are some, there were some, gosh, that series in particular was really, I think just gag manga and comedy series in particular are some of my most difficult projects because they tend to be the most dense with text. There's usually a lot of sight gags and gags that rely on text or, otherwise like Japanese text elements to be a part of the joke. And there are, depending on the publisher, sometimes they might want that be like, hey, if we put a subtitle next to like a joke, it's sort of like an extra effort to sort of like, it's like explaining the joke almost, Subtitling can be really tricky when there's a lot of visual text elements on the page, because then you have both the original Japanese text and like smaller text next to it. And if there's just not a lot of white space to work with, like things can get really cluttered.
It's not just like, oh, cool, I get to like see the manga earlier than everyone else. It's not just that. It's like there's a lot of like precision that you have to have done. So it's not a walk in the park. I can totally imagine.
Yeah, it very much depends. It's a very per project basis. Some are easy breezy, some are real hard, but I think it all sort of balances out in the end.
Yeah, no, of course. Obviously, it takes two to tango. And there's the translator, Caleb, who's been there for a while. Do you work with Caleb? Like, do you interact with one another on a project? Or is it usually like it's passed off from one to the other?
I would say it really just is like if the translator is, if they're active on social media or on Discord and I'm like, hey, I know this person, I'll reach out to them. Sometimes I'll have questions or like, hey, can you clarify this thing? Or like, hey, maybe they missed something and I just want to like, I just want to like sneak something in. It's really convenient for me when I am in contact with the translator, but it's not an expectation for every project, and it's more like a convenience. And Caleb's a good friend of mine now. We've worked on and have worked on since plenty of other projects outside of Dragon Ball. So it's just sort of like it's more like another feather in her cap, really.
Oh, nice. That's cool. That's what I like to hear. That on these projects you then get to know the person and you just get to just chill out and like see talk to them outside of the project. That's nice to know.
Yeah, exactly. And then of course when it's it's nice to have somebody that you can like freak out or gush about the story with before it's out too. It's a nice little bonus when you're just like, I need to get this out. I need to get my hot take out before the thing comes out. So you're the only person in the world who can hear it. I really like coordinating with translators whenever I get the chance.
Oh, well, of course. I imagine probably with Caleb's job in particular, it'd be like you get the Japanese text and then you got to translate that. And then, it's got to be like as close to it as possible. And I mean, I remember like saying, I think we were just talking before when we were fixing up this interview, is that there are things that you get from Japan. So say, like, because there's the debate of that's not how you say that technique. Is that technique? Is that transformation? So you have no say in that whatsoever, right?
Yeah. I personally, I when it comes to translation and localization decisions like that, I'm just sort of sitting on the sidelines. Like, you guys take care of that. I'm there if I notice typos, I'll still fix them. But there are things like that I'm just sort of like, yep, have fun.
I think that's fair enough.
But I mean, as somebody who, I grew up reading, or I grew up watching the old Funimation dub, of course, and have seen, I've read the English version of the manga, and even between like the dub, the sub, and the English translation of the manga, there are multiple different interpretations of the same thing that are all sort of valid in their own ways, or at least decisions that have some sort of logic behind them usually. Obviously there are stuff, between like the Funimation dub of its era, and it's just like, well, that's a little bit weird. But
listen, be glad that you don't have Super Saiyan God, Super Saiyan controlled Berserk Vegeta in the main timeline.
Yeah, or having to letter Super Saiyan God, Super Saiyan into a tiny little bubble every time would be awful.
Oh. At least in the manga, it's Super Saiyan Blue.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. No,
very thankful for that.
We call it that as well.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I imagine that it's probably, I think it's down to the video games, like, because I think that's where Blue came up first. So then it was just like a case of like, oh, well, we gotta keep it like that for consistency's sake. Oh dear.
And consistency is another big thing too, where we're, I of course came in, 53 chapters in, so what do I know? Caleb didn't start with, he didn't start Super until a little bit later. So there's just sort of like, there's a lot of teamwork, both in just sort of like, you have to sort of be able to stick to the groundwork that other folks have left behind you. And you can't just throw that stuff out because you feel like it. To bring it back to lettering, I've never seen people comment on this or if people have noticed at all. But while like I actually have a fair bit of freedom when it comes to my sound effects for the volumes. But I did a lot of research when it comes to like how the previous person, like what kind of fonts they use for the sound effects and how they styled them and how they matched them to the original Japanese art. And I wanted to make the transition as seamless as possible. So I don't know if I don't think I've ever seen folks comment like, wow, the lettering looks really weird now or something like that. But I tried my best. I think nowadays it's definitely more, it's taken on to be more of my own thing. But I'm hoping if folks look at like the transition from volume 8 to like 9 and 10, it's just like I hope it's close enough that nobody was just like, oh, that's weird.
No, I'm sure it's fine. We're gonna like wrap this up shortly, but if there's anything that you have, are there any little Easter eggs that you've left in that you can possibly tell us?
Oh, Easter eggs. Oh my gosh.
Like your own little signature.
I think around volume 12 or 13, I've started. I guess I need to step back a little bit first in that sound effects in Japanese manga are like they are hand drawn by the artist 99% of the time. And they're usually, they're baked into the artwork, which is why we have to like erase and redraw stuff when we're doing English sound effects. But when we're doing English sound effects, we just use fonts most of the time. And when you're using fonts, those have they have a very flat outline, because it's just like a vector line. And so, it's all the same width. And it can lose some of the personality of the original like hand drawn art. We try to get as close as we can. But there was a letterer on Twitter who sort of just like was able to manipulate the outlines of the fonts in a way that makes them look more hand drawn. And I started experimenting with that in Super around volume 11 or 12. And I think by 13 or 14, I had fully incorporated it into my workflow. And I've been sort of going back to the English lettering of the original Viz Dragon Ball release. Because those sound effects, like that was at a time before manga lettering went fully digital. So a lot of that stuff is hand drawn and looks, like very, very authentic and, very handcrafted. And so I've been sort of taking inspiration and leaning more into like the stylings of how the sound effects used to look in like the 90s and early 2000s, while also having a modern touch. I don't know. That might be the closest thing to an Easter egg that I have.
Well, no, that's great. That's really good to know. Like, folks, the detail is in here, and it's not just the translators. It's not just the people who put it together to upload it to Viz Media's website, which you can just for a couple of bucks a month get the translations. But the last 3 chapters of Super are free, but you can always look for it there legitimately. Which is what I do for the reviews. Just so you know, Brandon, I'm doing it legitimately.
Oh yeah, I've been watching your reviews for a while, so I'm like, yeah, they're using the official.
Yeah, no, I'm doing legitimate business. But yeah, but it's good to know. It's good to know that you're harking back to the original releases, the hand-drawn releases, and trying to bring it in for this relative high-pressure environment. So that's really good to know. Nice.
I don't know. I'm a huge nerd when it comes to manga lettering and stuff like that, which is it's a really silly thing to say, but
no, it's not at all. You got passion. You got passion for it, and that's good.
I love bringing a sort of maybe subconscious level of cohesiveness to the whole product. And so that there are things, from various other, releases like the original Viz release of Dragon Ball, where I'm just like, it would be cool to bring some of the stuff back in. So I would like to think I'm doing my research, might be a good way to put it. But I'm always evolving my style and how I approach things. So
Great. Now that's really awesome. So you heard it here, folks. Everyone on board on the Super Manga is definitely keeping it as authentic and legitimate as possible. Yeah, with that, thank you very much, Brandon, for being here.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been awesome, and like I said at the start, I'm a huge fan of y'all. So it's been really, really, really cool to just get to chit chat about the work.
That was very enlightening and interesting.
No, that was really good. So once again, for people who are still listening, do tell us where people can find you.
Yeah, I'm pretty active on Twitter. I'm just at Brandon Bovia. It's just literally my name. I do talk a lot of nonsense, just sort of whatever, but I try to make sure that I do highlight a lot of the work I'm doing just across the manga industry in general. So if you're at all interested in just sort of like that general level insight on the kinds of projects that I work on, that do include Dragon Ball, and I like to just sort of talk shop with folks whenever I get the chance to. So I'm also a fan who's also just like speculating and wondering what'll happen next.
You heard it. Go check out their Twitter. So once again, thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Hab, for joining me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And once again, thank you all out there for listening. So if you liked this episode of Up on the Lookout, do follow and subscribe on your podcasting platform of choice, or subscribe to the YouTube channel for more episodes like this, as well as our regular monthly super reviews, to which Brandon works on. Hope you're all having a good rest of your day. Do stay safe, and until next time, I shall see you again very soon. Ta-ra!
Bye.
See ya.